Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and Thor, issue number 11. This was an interesting book, and there were a lot of good things in it. Did I like the comic book? I didn't necessarily like the comic book, but I can appreciate a lot of what was in here. It's the difference between something being right up your alley and something that isn't up your alley, but you respect what was done in it. So even the things that didn't work, it was almost like looking at a negative image of, I don't know, the woman of your dreams, right? It was still something that you can't balk at. That said, when I got to the end of the book, literally past the end of the book and got to the letters page, there was a letter that actually bothered me and made me rethink a lot of what I saw in here. I'm going to talk about all that good stuff. First, before we get into who made this book, I do want to point something out fairly briefly. I am a comic book reviewer. I've been doing this for, 4 years now or so. I know how to review a comic book. I know how to review a book, a movie. I can review things. You know what I'm saying? I'm not just here to go, I really like this thing, it was nice, or I don't like this thing, it's not nice. Like, that's not what I'm here for. It's just simply not. Okay, so if you came here because you liked a book and you need validation from other people to like the book, it's not what I'm here for. And same with the inverse. If you didn't like the book, I'm not here to bash a book so that you can feel better about not liking the book. If you feel the need to have some stranger on the internet validate your feelings on a book, you don't need a reviewer, you need a therapist. By the way, the like and dislike buttons are right down there. Go crazy. You know what I'm saying? I don't do this for the money. I do this because I love the medium of comic books. I can assure you, I don't make nearly enough money to quit my job as an English professor in order to do this. So it's just, it is what it is, man. I don't do this for the writers or the artists or for the company. I have zero aspirations of working for Marvel, maybe 1%. All right, I would like to be able to do something one day, but honestly, I don't need Marvel to do that. It is what it is, man. It is what it is. So if you're just here for validation, please, you can leave. I'm not here to validate your thoughts on the comic book. I'm here to review the medium itself and this issue in the medium. And there is going to be a good hefty chunk of that in here because there's a lot of ground to work with here. Let's get started. So, Prey, part 3 of 6. Donny Cates is the writer, Nick Klein on art, Matt Wilson doing the color art, VC's Joe Sabino doing the letters and the design, Oliver Coipel and Laura Martin doing the cover art. Whole bunch of variant covers out there for you to choose from, including one from this artist, Nick Klein. Stan Lee, his brother Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby created Thor. Let's get started from there. So, a trope that is usually used in movies and not so often used in comics is the meat paradox. This is a cliche where you have a character who is evil and you want to show that he's evil, you want to show that he's bestial, you will have him eating a steak. I actually had to sit back and remind myself, Donny Cates is not a vegan. He's not a vegetarian. So he didn't do this to do this like, anti-meat. No, he did this to show that Donald Blake is actually evil. So awesome. Good job. That said, I don't think that this would have worked in any way, shape, or form because it is still a cliche. So the only way it would have worked is if the art was amazing. Well, guess what? He has Nick Klein on this art. Nick Klein is the kind of artist where you can see his work and hate him immediately, and you realize it's out of jealousy. Like, Nick Klein is just, he's one of the, I don't know that he's unsung, but he almost feels unheralded. I don't think enough people talk about what Klein is capable of putting on a book. And you look at this first page of Blake up close. I mean, you don't see his eyes in this, and you know immediately who this is. You see the unkempt facial hair. You see him chewing into this steak, and there's blood running over one of his teeth and down the front of his lip. He used the napkin, and even that looks savage, like with the facial expression. Mind you, it's only showing the his mouth. That's all it's showing. It's not even showing his complete jawline. My God. Nick Klein is a gift to this book. Donnie's writing on here, his storytelling, is not only halved without Nick Klein on here, it is gimped. Like it is literally hobbled. He is Donald Blake from the original Journey into Mystery Comics, where Donald Blake is on a cane hobbling, saying with this little wooden stick. Right? That's who Cates is without Klein on this book. That's not an insult towards Cates. That is a praise, a high praise of Nick Klein in the story. This man, he is an amazing artist, and he needs more people recognizing what he's capable of. Boom, daddy. That's what Nick Klein brings to this comic book, not just to this issue, to this series. Wow. The tired tropes that tropey trope Mr. Donny Cates is able to get away with because it's drawn so well. I mean, I don't think I could keep score. I'm saying with an abacus, I don't think I could keep score. That said, we have a buildup in here. One of the things that I want to, did I also mention, I'm going to show you this image here because I don't know if the images that Marvel is eventually going to put out for this will show this, but I mean, Blake looks like a demon with this hot water vapor coming up from the coffee mug. Like, wow, it looks like Bushmaster at the very least, right? Like Moon Knight's going to jump out of nowhere. But man, Klein is just a savage in here. Like the backgrounds, this attention to detail. My God, man, put this man on more comics and give him more money. I feel that a lot of what Cates is trying to do in this story, he's bringing the build up to this one point that is expressed in a double page spread, and then it's taken away from us. If you didn't read the comic book, that's why I'm trying not to do spoilers here. If you did, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't have to tell you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Goes to a double page full spread, right? And that didn't happen. Yet it's several panels later of you wondering, wait, how did that? And there's the build up to it that makes sense. That makes you think that it must have. It's like, are we in two different, alternate dimensions at this point? What is going on? It is very, very hard to do something like that if you don't have a good artist. You understand what I'm saying? Wow. Now, some things that I didn't like that I liked and that I definitely respected. I am not a fan of Ryan North's Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. I bring this up because Ratatoskr is in here, and it's North's version of Ratatoskr, this Chaos God version. I didn't like this version. It was weird. All that being what it is, it worked for the Squirrel Girl story. I mean, it's Squirrel Girl, and here's this God Squirrel, right? The squirrel that runs on the roots of Yggdrasil, talking to the eagle and talking to Nidhogg, right? Incredible story and great idea to use this character, this version of Ratatoskr in here. Why? Because that's what the story calls for. We just saw this during the War of the Realms, right? At any moment, he could have just, by he, I mean Donny Cates, he could have just done the regular version of Ratatoskr. He could have done the version that Walter Simonson is doing right now in the Ragnarok books. He could have done any version that he wanted to. He chose to stick with continuity. Now, again, I don't appreciate the Chaos God aspect of Ratatoskr. It does not work for me. I love the art of it. I mean, it's Klein, for crying out loud. But even though I strongly dislike this version of Ratatoskr, I really genuinely appreciate, heartfelt, that Cates chose to use this version for the sake of continuity. In a time period where where franchises, for the most part, not just Marvel, almost every franchise that's out there right now, be it Ghostbusters or Star Trek or Star Wars, whatever, all these different franchises, DC Comics, almost vehemently refuse to stick to continuity. And I understand the concept that, like Carla Pacheco just said recently, that continuity kills. She also understands that continuity is also pretty important because there is zero use for a franchise to the fans if you're not going to stick to some measure of continuity. Because I don't need you to tell me all these new Captain America stories that don't have anything to do with anything. I can tell them to myself. We can tell them to each other. It's not that big of a deal. End your license so it can go into the public domain, and we'll get people who actually care about the books to do that. That's what's happening with Phantoma and several other characters that are in the public domain. You could absolutely do the same thing with Captain America and all these other, including Thor, right? So why even bother having a franchise if you're not going to stick to continuity? So the fact that Cates chose to use even a version that I don't appreciate, I do appreciate that he did that. So again, here's something that works for me, even though the concept itself doesn't. It's something that I can genuinely accept as good for comics, good for any franchise, right? What's the use of a Star Trek universe where there was never a Captain Kirk or a Spock or an Enterprise? What's the use? Call it Star Voyage. You don't need to call it Star Trek. There's no point in that. Same with comics and any other medium, any other show or book, whatever. There are several scenes in here with Sif talking to Volstagg specifically and the Warriors 3, and she goes in where Thori is, and she's talking to Beta Ray Bill. Beta Ray Bill, who's been through a lot recently, and seeing this poor guy treated the way that he is, it's sad. And it makes me think there damn well better be an up and coming, the up and comings pretty soon. And knowing Cates, seeing his history, I have zero doubt that there will be. Cates clearly loves, he told me directly, he told me personally that one of his favorite characters is Beta Ray Bill. Awesome. Liking characters named Bill is a good thing, right? It's good towards health. That being said, I know with all the times that he's used Beta Ray Bill in a seriously good way, including the Death and the Inhuman stories, yeah, I'm looking forward, really looking forward to Bill finally getting his up and comings. There was a panel scene in here, and it was right here. Try not to show you too much. That the panel sequence actually didn't work. Didn't like that. It's not the natural way. The way that this actually worked isn't the way that it should have worked. It's a weird thing, but it is what it is. It's hard to tell you exactly which one was supposed to be next and not, so that we can get to the one that's clearly underneath, right? It's an interesting path to go. It's one of those situations where Klein has done an incredible job with the panel layouts. More on that, give me a second. But here's where it actually failed, because they weren't staggered enough for us to be able to have a good understanding of where the panels were actually supposed to, like which one was supposed to go next. There wasn't a good intuitiveness to it, and that counts, because if you find something that, like, there's the bottleneck of the story basically, where you're trying to do a free flow reading and all of a sudden you get stopped and you're like, wait, where's the flow of this? Which one am I supposed to do next? Otherwise, I might not really be able to follow the story right. It's still, even if you figure it out the first time, you're still stopping to figure it out. And then you have to get started with the story again. Things like that should not happen with a comic book. Like it's horrible when you have to see somebody do the arrows, like, which Kirby even did that, back in the day when he was first trying to really, do a lot in the comics. When you have to put arrows, like, that's a horrible thing by today's standards. And I feel like this would have been better off with just the arrows in there, because that was a hell of a bottleneck. Anyway, something important about the panels. There was not a single page in this comic book where the panel layout was the same. In fact, the panels actually start to get more chaotic until it gets to that double page spread of which I talked about. After that, it's still chaotic, but it starts to get more ordered and more structured again, even though it leads to that particular ending that we saw where, much like in the Venom comic book this week by Cates, oh look, here's a friendly face we haven't seen in a bit. I wonder where this is going to go. Um, this was this was a fun comic book for all the parts in here that worked, that flowed together, that made a solid machine. I really liked it. Then I read the last page. And there's a lot more to this book, but there's going to be a lot of spoilers if I do that, so I'm trying to avoid all of it. Let's get into this letter. It is by Skip the Dog. Yeah, I think we should have skipped the dog in this case. It reads, I don't remember the day or the exact year, but I remember the Speedy Mart and the barbershop next door where they had a table in the corner with a stack, more or less, of various comics. They let us come in and read them, but we couldn't take them with us. Among them, I found my first copy of Journey into Mystery and was introduced to Thor and Loki for the very first time. I wish I'd sneaked out with that book. I also like the grammar in this. Sneaked is the proper term here, not snuck. Most people would say, I wish I'd snuck out with the book. No, it's sneaked. I think this version of Thor rivals all of his incarnations over the many years, including the great Simonson issues. Thanks so much, Skip the Dog. Skip, I don't usually, in fact, I honestly believe this is going to be the first time that I've ever actually said something negative about someone's opinion of a book, because I've always said this, all opinions of a comic book are valid. Here's the problem I have with this. I think that's one of the most ridiculous statements, that final sentence there is one of the most ridiculous statements I've possibly heard. I don't need to defend anybody in comics or otherwise. I simply don't. I don't get paid for it. I don't care. But it is about understanding what you're reading. It's not even just about the art. Like there's so much to that statement. I feel that that statement was a plant. I feel like it was written by Donny Cates. You know what I'm saying? Or the editor or something. Like I don't know who did that. But I mean, who says something like that? Let's be realistic. This is issue number 11. Clearly, Skip the Dog could not have read this issue for his letter to be published in this issue. So at best, he read issue 10 and shot his letter out as quickly as possible, and they said, we got to put this in the next issue because wow, right? If it went through email or tweet. There is, and even if you give him issue number 11, it's still less than a year of this comic book being out, less than a year's worth of issues. And you're going to take what is heralded as the greatest run on any comic book ever, a 5-year run by a writer and artist, a master storyteller. You know, in the back of this book, there's this thing about Mike Hobson. I feel bad because I never knew who Mike Hobson was until, well, actually, I read it in Venom, but, until I actually sat down and read it, but it's in this comic book also, clearly. I don't know who Mike Hobson is, but I do know who that is. That's Jim Shooter, right there that he's sitting with. Talked with Shooter many times, and one of the things I asked him about was Walter Simonson, because he's given a lot of praise to Walter's wife, but not a lot of praise to Walter himself publicly. So, I asked him, and he says, the best thing I could ever say about Walter is he is this incredible cannon that it will always hit its target, but you can't aim it. You understand what's being said? He can't tell. Simonson is one of those guys, he simply couldn't tell him, you have to do this or you can't do that. He couldn't do that with Simonson. He would never listen to him. But what he could do is put him on the right book. So the only real creative input that Shooter would ever have with Simonson is telling him which book he can work on and which one he can't. He chose to put him on Thor. Clearly a great decision. And that's where Shooter's credit ends. Everything else is Simonson. And he just nailed so many different places. One of the things that he nailed is that the Midgard serpent didn't show up. I'm going to explain why I'm bringing this up. The Midgard serpent didn't show up until later on in the second half of his run. You had the Surtur Wars, the Muspelheim Wars, Crack of Doom and all that, the Sword of Twilight and everything. Like, you had all of that stuff. You had the Beta Ray Bill stuff, right? The challenges and everything. You had all of this stuff. And then you had the Hell-Accursed stuff that happened after all of that was solved. All of it. And that led up into, like, the Morlock Massacre and so many different stories. The Mephisto stories would actually come immediately after the final battle that Thor would have, where he's supposed to have died, Ragnarok. And that was his battle with Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. There was so much thought put into this final boss level character of the Midgard serpent. So much thought put into it. So much time. Sometimes a little bit of something in a story. Maybe in the next issue there was a lot leading up to it. Another story there'd be nothing leading up to it, but there'd always be that little bit of, oh, we're getting the build, we're getting the build, we're getting the build. And this character, like, the first appearance wasn't under Simonson. The first appearance was actually back under the Kirby days. And it was almost pointless having the character show up when he did. But it's also understood why he showed up. When I saw the cover of this comic book, even though Jormungandr didn't show up in this issue, he has showed up in previous issues of Cates' run. The very first thing that I thought of was Undeserved. When Simonson finally showed up with the Midgard Serpent, I think that was issue number 180 of Thor, you have got a whole book of splash pages. The whole entire book is just splash pages. It's something that, to my recollection, has never been done before. And it was bold. And it was dangerous because it might not have worked. It might have looked cartoonish. This is supposed to be the final freaking battle with the ultimate boss that Thor could ever fight. When Jormungandr shows up, the only time he would show up is when he believes that Thor is at his weakest or an extremely weak moment. And it's like, you are going to die and I am going to be the one who kills you. Even if it means my own death. Because that's how much it means to me to kill you. That is, like, it's fate, it's destiny, it's amazing. And I see Jormungandr so early in this run, and all I can think of is Undeserved. There's no behind the scenes, there's no subtlety, there's no real thought of a mystery put into, like, who is this thing that's, oh, here's the Endless Winter. Here's the Endless Winter, whatever the casket of the cask of Endless Winter, whatever the hell the thing is that just happened before. You know what I'm saying? That 4 issues of whatever the hell that was. There's no, like, subtlety. There's no behind the scenes stuff. There's no, well, you can't see who's talking, or it's a disguise or something. Somebody's talking about end days. Somebody's talking about, oh, I'm going to get you. Thor is now in this place where the Midgard Serpent is, again, even though Jormungandr didn't show up in this issue. And Thor's supposed to be at his weakness. Like, there was this scene in here where he's just like, oh, I have the thunder and I carry it with me, and Odin will answer the prayers, and blah, blah. And then the very next panel, he's blubbering like a little baby. Please, somebody please help me. It's like, dude, I understand that maybe time is being run differently here. We expressed that, but it's also only 3 panels, technically 2, but 3 panels showing Thor breaking down. Like, not even breaking. There's no There's no lead into it. He goes from rah rah sis kumbah to and it didn't work for me. It's undeserved. There was no build up. There was no lead into. There was nothing that made me say, "Holy crap. Is Thor starting to crack?" No, it's like, "Yeah, Thor. Oh crap, he cracked." Yeah, that's just you want to talk about movie tropes, like the meat paradox in the beginning of this. Think of the hurricane. You remember that movie, The Hurricane, with Denzel Washington? When he was put into solitaire, he didn't just crack. It happened over a period of time, and you saw it happening, and it worked. First he's fighting, and you see multiple versions of him. Yeah, I'm a fighter. I'm a fighter. I'm a fighter. And the other one, just stop. I just don't want this to go. And then even the fighter he starts to break down, and everything starts to break down. You feel that the character is losing it. And in this, you see two panels. You see two lousy panels. And I'm really heartbroken that we're talking end boss, the final boss, and it's just undeserved. There's I don't feel like I feel like this is just going to diminish the character more of Jormungandr more than anything else, and by default diminishing Thor, because here's this guy who just defeated Galactus and he kneecapped him literally, and all these cool things, and just end boss. I'm sorry. Do we think that Jormungandr is on the level of Galactus? Galactus is more powerful than Jormungandr, but Jormungandr is the one who's supposed to beat Thor. Do we believe that Jormungandr is actually going to beat Thor? I don't believe anything in this comic book, and that letter at the end that said what it said. Even though I'm 80% sure that that was a planted letter. I'm 80% sure that the real author is like Donnie or his wife, or freaking he wrote it in the place of his dog. I don't know. I don't care. I don't believe that there's a real Skip the dog. That just doesn't make sense to me. Skip the dishes. At this point, that doesn't make sense to me. That someone would write something like that. That they've been reading this since Journey into the Mystery, and they think that at best assumed that it was a full 10 issues. That those 10 issues, I could say it that way too, are better than the Simonson run, better than the Straczynski run, better than the Kirby and Lee run, and better than all these runs out there. I mean, even Aaron's run it wasn't the greatest, but it had some great moments. Great moments. Moments that would make you tear up. Moments that would make you say, even though that's Lady Jane, that is still Thor. There were great moments like that, man. And we got 10 issues, and suddenly, I think it's turning into the best. I don't believe that's real. And if it is real, I think that Skip might need a therapist also. I cannot believe that was a real letter. I simply cannot. Like, it is such an absurd statement. That being said, if you're Skip, hey, Skip. Maybe you need to walk your dog. Anyway, I don't. I can respect a lot of what happened in this comic books in my closing thoughts. I can respect a lot of what was done in this comic book. But at the same time, I do see that Cates clearly doesn't love Thor the way that he loves Venom, and therefore he's not going to be able to use his tropes in what I deem as an effective way. I feel like a lot of his tropes are just going to fail, and he is clearly heavily leaning on Klein in order to get a lot of these thoughts to be passable and plausible. So, flaunt it if you got it, man. Flaunt it if you got it. He did that with Stegman. He'll do that with Klein also. And I look forward to seeing that. But I do wish that these issues, I do wish that this title, I wish that Cates would slow down with it. I don't need to see, fireworks every time that we start with a book. I don't need to see that. What I need is a story. I need a damn good story. If you can't sit down and think of a good story, maybe consider moving on to a book that's not so hard for you to do. That's just the way that I feel about it. I feel like so much of this is just cheap thrills. I mean, we could talk about the idea that the easiest way to bring emotion to men to a story is to do some like a dog story where the dog dies at the end, which is another, it's probably the trope that Cates is known best for. We can also talk about how, oh, you can also do a story where a father and a son are trying to, have a relationship, but the father just keeps on messing up, and the son still loves his dad, but he's trying so hard, and just the father keeps on failing, and it's starting to shake the son's resolve. And then finally, the father says, "I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make you proud," and he does, but he dies in the process. And oh crap, that just happened this week in Venom. Kate's, bruh. They are cheap thrills. Now, that trope works in Venom because, again, you could tell that he loves the character. I can't see anything that tells me that Cates actually loves the character of Thor. I simply don't see that. So, too much of this is hoping or wishing that it were better. No, that it was better, singular. But it's just not. It's not. This book is severely lacking, and I think a lot of it, most of it, is because he just doesn't have the appreciation for this character that someone should if they're going to be writing a book. Anyway, guys, that was a really long review, and thank you if you stuck around for the whole damn thing. Hey, while you're at it, why not let an ad play and, allow me to make some money? Maybe I quit my job as a teacher. If not, like the video. I'll talk to you guys later. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.